Hey guys, welcome to part two of the global impact of the world wars. This time we're going to be looking at a time period known as the interwar period that goes from 1918 with the end of World War One to it's kind of disputed about exactly when World War II starts, but until like the mid to the end of the 1930s. It depends on whether or not you include the Japanese invasion of China as the beginning of World War II or not. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the details here. So this is what we're going to be covering in this video. Um, we'll be looking at the economic conditions that led to the Great Depression. Oh, let me fix that typo right there. We'll be looking at the economic impact of the Great Depression globally. We'll be looking at the economic responses to the Great Depression undertaken by liberal democratic nations. We'll be looking at the rise of right-wing authoritarian governments, and we'll be looking at the economic and political effects of right-wing governments. Why did I capitalize economic? Oh well, whatever. So let's get into it. So we'll start by looking at the economic conditions that made the Great Depression possible. Basically, after World War I, there were some major structural weaknesses in the world economy, which you would expect after fighting the most brutal and total war ever in human history. First of all, there was a phenomenon known as a post-war economic slump. And the reason for this is that during the war, countries were producing as much stuff as possible in order to continue the war effort. Factories were working full-time, producing weapons and ammunition and stuff like that. Now that the war is over, those factories don't need to work as much, which results in a decline in demand and a decline in employment. So the economy slumps after World War I ends. On top of that, three of the four most powerful nations in the world, France, Britain, and Germany, are all deeply in debt. Britain and France owe huge amounts of money to the United States, who basically loaned them money during World War I. And Germany is required to pay a truly astronomical reparations payment to Britain and France to make up for all the damage they did in World War I. And these debts are going to be a huge drag on the French, British, and German economies if they can't figure out some way to pay them. However, there is kind of a solution to these problems, and the solution is the United States. During the interwar period, the United States is going to enter a period known as the Roaring Twenties. From 1920 to 1929, the United States economy is going to grow very rapidly. There's going to be a slight post-war slump right after World War I ends, but by 1920, the United States economy is able to re-gear all of its factories to produce for a consumer economy. So rather than producing tanks and artillery and guns and stuff like that for the military effort, the United States switches to mass-producing consumer goods, like cars and household appliances and stuff like that. And this results in rapid economic growth in the United States. This allows for the United States to then more or less bankroll the entire world economy. The best example of this is what is known as the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan is illustrated over here. And basically, this is a way of allowing all of the different countries in debt after World War I to meet their obligations and to keep their economies functioning. And basically how it works is the United States is going to loan money to Germany at very, very low interest rates. It's basically going to give Germany free loans. Germany is then going to use the money from the United States to rebuild its economy while also paying back Britain and France. Britain and France are then going to get the money from Germany, and they're going to use that money to rebuild their economies while also paying back the United States. So this works out for everybody. France, Britain, and Germany can meet their obligations and rebuild their economies, and the United States is ultimately going to get all of this money back plus interest. So it works out for the United States as well. Now, the main interest of this economic system is that the entire world economy is dependent on the United States having the money to continue to buy stuff and grow its own economy while also loaning money out to the other major industrial powers. And this is going to backfire in 1929. So in 1929, there is a massive stock market crash in the United States for reasons that we won't go into. But as a result of this stock market crash, there is a series of bank failures and just a general economic panic in the United States. And this results in the United States economy more or less shutting down for a brief period. And the failure of the US economy in 1929 then triggers a chain reaction that causes a global economic collapse. And here's how it works. The United States, because of the stock market crash and the banking failures, no longer has the money to loan to Germany. So Germany is now not receiving money from the United States. It cannot pay its reparation payments, and Germany then falls into a recession. Because Germany can no longer pay its reparations, France and Britain can no longer meet their obligations to the United States, and France and Britain also go into a recession. On top of this, all of these countries stupidly erect protective tariffs in order to what they think they're doing is they're trying to protect their own factories and their own jobs by blocking trade from other countries. But really what this does is by blocking trade with other countries, it actually makes the world economy worse by reducing global trade and reducing global demand. All four of the major economies in the world, the United States, Britain, France, and Germany, are now in recession, and they've all stopped trading with each other. And this more or less tanks the entire global economy. Not just rich industrial countries, but also poorer parts of the world that produce raw materials are now lack people to sell their products to, and you see massive worldwide unemployment. Another effect of this is you see the rise in popularity of communism. Communism argues that capitalism is inherently unfair and unstable, and the Great Depression definitely makes it look like the communists have a good point there, as more and more people, hardworking, honest, skilled people, can no longer find decent employment. As a result of the Great Depression, we see a number of different responses by different countries. We're going to look first at the responses by liberal democracies. That is, the major liberal democracies we'll be looking at are Britain, France, and the United States. These are all countries that continue the democratic tradition and attempt to deal with the economic crisis in a constitutional democratic way. We'll look at Britain first. Britain basically completely fails to understand the crisis. What they do is they actually cut government spending during the crisis to prevent the government from going into debt. This only makes things worse because it reduces the amount of money in the economy and results in even more people losing their jobs. France has a slightly different response. France, after a period of wavering back and forth, ultimately ends up moving toward a socialist style of government, a democratic socialist style of government. What you see here is an increased role of the government in the economy to make sure that people have their basic needs met. And they do all sorts of stuff, but two things that they specifically do is they make sure that workers receive a certain minimum wage, and they make sure that certain basic staple goods, such as food, have a low price. The government guarantees a low price on certain basic goods. And this means that even though things aren't great, people still have a reasonable pay and have access to basic goods. Probably the most extensive and innovative approach among the liberal democracies, though, was seen in the United States with what is known as the New Deal. And the New Deal employed something known as Keynesian economic theory. And so in Keynesian economics, the idea is that during a recession, the problem is that there's no money going around in the economy, and that the government can reverse the recession by basically creating a whole bunch of money and flushing it into the economy by creating government jobs or spending lots of money on roads or dams or other infrastructure projects or the military. And the United States does this. And they do all sorts of big infrastructure projects like building the Hoover Dam or employing young men to go out and build the Appalachian Trail, which you see here. And these measures do help somewhat. It doesn't fully end the economic crisis, but it does improve the situation in the United States. So basically, France and the United States do see some improvement. Britain, more or less, totally fails to respond to the crisis properly. But nobody sees a total end of the economic recession. The situation is somewhat different in countries that adopt a different approach. And this different approach could generally be known as right-wing authoritarianism. It's sometimes known as fascism. In Germany, it's called Nazism. But there are all these different governments in Japan, Germany, Italy, Spain, and other places as well see a turn towards right-wing authoritarianism. So why is right-wing authoritarianism a popular choice during the interwar period? Basically, it responds to common people's biggest fears and concerns during this time period. It responds to people's feelings that the economy is unfair and feeling like they can't get a job. It responds to uncertainty over rapid cultural changes. A lot of people with more conservative ideas don't necessarily know if they feel like the way the economy is moving is a good thing. And it also responds to fears of communist takeovers. As a result of the Great Depression, communism is becoming much more popular, and right-wing authoritarian governments promise to, if nothing else, at least arrest all of the socialists. And so right-wing authoritarian governments all have similar policies that they put in place. First of all, they either strictly limit or completely eliminate democracy. They do not believe in democracy as a process for making decisions. They all promote a certain superior national identity as a way of unifying the nation, which a lot of people like. They increase state control of the economy in order to boost industrial production and military growth. And this is often good for fixing the recession because the government starts spending more money. And they focus on anti-socialism, and they promise order. So if nothing else, the right-wing authoritarian groups will prevent a communist revolution, which is one thing that a lot of people are very scared of during this time period. Now, during this time period, right-wing governments see a fair amount of success, and they begin to expand militarily. The first example of this is in fascist Italy, where the fascists under Mussolini take over in 1923. Mussolini stays in power until World War II, and during that time, he does a number of things, including conquer Ethiopia to make up for Italy's defeat in the 19th century there. Imperial Japan sees a similar move in the 1920s with increasing limitations on democracy and an increasing military expansion that ultimately results in the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, which they renamed Manchukuo, and eventually into the rest of China itself. Some people consider this invasion of China that begins in the 1930s the real beginning of World War II. This is very good for the Japanese economy because by spending huge amounts of money on the military, it more or less pulls Japan out of the recession. We see something similar in Nazi Germany. Hitler is able to take over Nazi Germany in 1933 through the sneaky manipulation of parliamentary politics there. After he takes power, he seizes total control and then begins to implement a massive rearmament campaign. He rebuilds the German military to be bigger and stronger than ever before, and the massive amount of money that he spends on the military pulls Germany out of the recession entirely. And many people hail Hitler as a economic genius during this time period, even though he kind of did it by accident. After rebuilding the German military, he then begins going around and expanding and taking over smaller countries in Europe, including Austria and Czechoslovakia. And the continued Japanese and German expansion increasingly threatens the global political order. These countries are expanding at the expense of the established liberal democracies of France, Britain, and the United States. Eventually, France, Britain, and the United States are going to push back, and this is going to result in open conflict between these right-wing authoritarian states and the liberal democracies that we talked about earlier. And this is what is known as World War II. So anyway, hopefully, as a result of this video, you understand how World War I helped to cause the Great Depression, and you also hopefully understand how the Great Depression led to the rise of right-wing authoritarian governments, and how those governments ultimately led to World War II. It's all connected. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions about this. Email me or GChat me. And make sure you fill out your guided notes or take pictures of your handwritten notes or whatever. Anyway, have a good evening or morning or whatever time it is, and bye.